Hi, hello. Good afternoon, we can say. We are here starting this this open house webinar. And before we started, I would like to do some housekeeping and give you more information about how it works. So we are in a webinar setting. So you will see that all of you have entered the room and are muted and your videos are off. This is because we are recording this session to be able afterwards to put it on our website and be able to share with those who couldn't attend today. You will see that on Zoom, you have your name and then a little 3 dots. You can go there and change your name and make yourself anonymous so that if you don't want others to see your name and be shared, you want to ask questions without your names to be seen, you will be seen as anonymous. You will also see that you have 2 different things. You have a chat and you have a Q&A. We ask you to use the chat to offer your broader insights, some experience, stuff you want to share with us. While please use the Q&A to put in all the questions you have so that at the end of the presentation, we will be able to really focus on the Q&A. Here, how the session will work today. We will have really a short welcome and introduction of the presenter, and then have a 15 minutes presentation where we will give you the highlights of this project. And the remaining 35 minutes will be about Q&A, so you will have the opportunity to offer, to mostly have all more detailed questions about the project. But before we start all of this, I always love to begin with the territorial acknowledge. And I would like to acknowledge that we are on the Lekwungen speaking people territories where the CRD building stands on. We recognize and respect the First Nations government across the region, the Sanghees and Esquimalt Nation in the core area, the Wasanic Nation out on the Sandwich Peninsula and the Gulf Islands, and to the west the Shanu, the Suk, and the Tachilat, and all of whom have had a standing relationship with this beautiful land and seawaters that continues to this day. As a newcomer to this land, I'm really grateful to be able to work, play, live in this beautiful territory and be welcome here. And now let's go more into the presentation. We have 2 amazing presenters today, Emma Taylor and Dan Casey. Emma Taylor is a planner for the CRD, and she's the project lead for the Regional Trails Widening and Lighting project. Emma has professional experience in community planning, parks and trails, and public engagement. Dan Casey is a transportation planner with Urban System. He has over 15 years of experience in multimodal transportation planning and design, and he works in communities of all sizes across Western Canada. So let's give the word now to the experts, and then we will dive into Q&As. Please go ahead, Emma.
Thank you, Bea, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us this sunny Monday afternoon. We're here today to talk about the Regional Trails Widening and Lighting project. So I'll begin with an overview of the CRD Regional Trails and what has led us to undertake this project. So as many of you are aware, CRD Regional Parks manages 3 regional trails in the capital region. These are the Galloping Goose, which was established in the 1980s, and it extends from Suk to Victoria. There's the Lochside Regional Trail, which was constructed in the early 2000s, connecting Saanich and Sydney. And more recently, there's the E&N Rail Trail connecting Victoria and the Western communities, with about 12 out of 17 kilometers constructed to date. So these trails are all multi-use trails developed within former railway corridors, and the corridors themselves are generally about 20 meters wide They're owned by the province of BC under the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, and CRD Regional Parks holds a license to manage and operate the trails. So the policy direction that we have for the regional trails are from several documents. The Regional Parks Strategic Plan and the Regional Trails Management Plan provide direction for the management and operation of the regional trails. Whereas the Regional Transportation Plan and the Regional Growth Strategy set targets for active transportation in the region. For example, by the year 2038, the target is 30% of all trips in the region be taken by bicycle or by walking. Regional Parks also conducts visitor surveys to gauge public satisfaction with the regional trails, and some recent survey results indicate the key issues on the regional trails include issues around safety, speed, volume of users, a lack of lighting and personal security, and a lack of separation between users. The 2016 Regional Trails Management Plan identifies a number of priority actions for the regional trails, including comparing options for widening and separating the Galloping Goose between the Selkirk, Trestle, and Grange Road at McKenzie Interchange. Also, assessing the feasibility of widening the Lochside Trail between the Switch Bridge at Uptown and McKenzie Avenue. And finally, to undertake a study on whether to light sections of the trails. So this map shows the priority areas identified in the Regional Trails Management Plan. So these sections of trail are classified as bike and pedestrian trails, where both active transportation and recreation are given preference. And in 2020, CRD hired a team of consultants from Urban Systems and PBX Engineering to study options for widening, separating, and lighting these sections of trails. The consultants have provided the CRD with a study, and they recommend a separated use pathway design with lighting. So the CRD board received this study earlier this year and are now asking for public input. I'll now turn it over to Dan Casey from Urban Systems to provide detail on the study and the recommended separated use pathway design and lighting. Over to you, Dan.
Great, thank you, Emma. So as Emma mentioned, I'm going to spend a few minutes here giving an overview of the study and some of its key findings. The study really was about identifying opportunities for improvement and enhancement to these 6.6 kilometers of existing regional trail. Some of the key opportunities that were considered include opportunities to provide more space to accommodate more people walking, rolling, and cycling, opportunities to improve safety at trail junctions and road crossings, opportunities to create comfortable conditions for travel at different speeds along the trails, and opportunities to improve safety, personal security, and comfort on trails. With that in mind, a number of technical activities were undertaken to help develop understanding of how the trails function currently. One piece of work that was done was counting relative to number of people on each segment of trail each day. The figures on the map to the right-hand side of the screen identify 2019 daily trail user volumes. So the section of Galloping Goose to the south between Selkirk, Trestle, and Switch Bridge at Uptown is approximately 2,700 trail users each day. The section of Galloping Goose to the west between Switch Bridge and to the west of McKenzie Avenue interchange is about 1,500 trail users each day. And the section of the Lochside Regional Trail north of the Switch Bridge extending as far north as McKenzie Avenue is approximately 2,000 trail users each day. These figures represent 2019 volumes and are used as a basis or a baseline for this technical study. Also worth acknowledging that approximately 80% of those trail users are cyclists, people on bikes, and 20% pedestrians. So using those figures as a baseline, projections were developed to represent what trail user volumes, daily trail user volumes might be up to 2040. So an annual growth rate of 2.5% increase in trail users was developed based on a number of factors, including consideration for historic growth trends in trail use in past, the impact that possible improvements to the trails might have on encouraging more people to use those trails, regional population projections, as well as growth in land use and development along the corridor, as well as what might be happening on active transportation networks in the communities nearby those trail corridors. So with those factors in mind, a 2.5% annual growth rate was applied, and the estimated trail user volumes for 2040 are shown on the map to the right. Those being approximately 4,500 for the southern section of the Galloping Goose between Selkirk, Trestle, and Switch Bridge, approximately 2,500 for the western segment of the Goose between Switch Bridge and McKenzie Avenue interchange, and about 3,500 for the section of the Lochside Trail north of Switch Bridge uptown. Another piece of technical work undertaken was to understand the characteristics and the dimensions of key trail user groups. The diagram on the left is showing typical pedestrian dimensions. Of critical importance is this dimension for user groups that might be pushing a stroller, that might be using a wheelchair, or might be using other mobility aids. The dimension for those trail users are absolutely fundamental to understanding what sort of dimensions and widths might be necessary. Right-hand side of the screen, similar information, but specific to cyclists. So a person on a bicycle takes up a width of approximately 3/4 of a meter, that being handlebar to handlebar. But then we also want to build in and give consideration for additional width, where a cyclist might not travel in a completely straight line, and where additional width might be necessary in order to provide for safe and comfortable side-by-side or passing conditions. Also important was consideration of trail user speeds. And so we know full well that someone walking travels typically much more slowly than someone on a bicycle. The diagram on the screen indicating a typical average walking speed of approximately 5 kilometers per hour, where a person on a bike might travel at 20 kilometers an hour or greater when you start factoring in e-bicycle use. And so not only is it the number of people using the trails and the kind of the dimensions of those people using the trails, it's also about the differential between different people actually using the trails in terms of how fast they travel and how comfortable and safe it might be for them to be sharing those trail facilities. An extensive inventory was also developed to understand the trail, its current condition. And so the diagram on the right-hand side of the screen is showing current existing trail widths. Sections shown in red and in orange are the narrowest segments of trail at between 3 to 4 meters. We see the majority of the section of the Lochside Regional Trail considered in this study is less than 4 meters in width. We also have a large number of the sections of the Galloping Goose to the south, which we at 3 to 3.5 or 3.5 to 4 meters. The portion of the Galloping Goose to the west, that being west of Uptown and west to beyond McKenzie interchange, we do see some wider trail widths at 4 or 5 meters, much of that due to more recent improvements associated with the interchange project. The number of site-specific constraints also need to be considered in giving consideration to further widening. And so there are 6 underpasses throughout the project study area, 5 bridges and trestle crossings, as well as a whole host of areas of steep slope or rock cuts or retaining wall retaining areas where widening is made much more difficult due to these site-specific constraints. So with that technical background in place, as well as research of what best practices have been in other communities, as well as industry guidelines, 3 different trail reconfiguration options were identified and used as the basis for furthering the study. The first option was a widened multi-use pathway, so that being taken the current trail function where all users share the space and widening it out consistently throughout the corridor. Option 2 being separated use pathways, so that would be a dedicated cycling pathway directly beside a dedicated pedestrian walkway, but distinct spaces just side by side. Option 3 being separated pathways with a center boulevard, physically separating with lateral space the cycling pathway from the pedestrian walkway. And so that's what's shown conceptually on the right-hand side of the screen. So those options were taken through options evaluation exercise to understand the benefits and disbenefits of each relative to one another. A number of criteria or factors were considered in undertaking that evaluation. Factors included capital costs, so physically the cost of each reconfiguration option. The level of improvement for trail user comfort, for the trail user experience. The level of improvement in terms of trail user safety and addressing trail user conflicts along the corridors. Possible environmental impacts. The overall quality of facility that each reconfiguration option presents. Constructability, as well as future and ongoing maintenance and operations impacts for each option. And so went through that option evaluation exercise, understood the benefits and disbenefits of each, and the study concluded that option 2, the separated pathway option, was the preferred option. This option, shown on the screen to the right, includes separated facilities for people walking and rolling and for people cycling. It includes a dedicated bike path of 4 meters and a dedicated pedestrian walkway of 2.5 meters. Both facilities facilitate side-by-side and passing for the users within each facility. And this configuration represents a total trail width of 6.5 meters, which exceeds the current widths by generally 2 to 3 meters, although some variation currently. So that's a general figure, but it does, over the length of the corridors, represents an increase in overall trail width. Consideration was given to possible phasing of these improvements over time, recognizing that it may not be feasible or realistic to achieve the entire improvements all at once. So shown on the diagram on the right-hand side of the screen is the recommended phasing of improvements. The first and highest priority is identified in dark blue, and that being the section of Galloping Goose between Selkirk, Trestle, and about Calduffle Road, which is in the uptown area just south of the Switch Bridge. This section of trail has a number of locations that are more narrow, as well as we see the highest trail user volumes in this location relative to the rest of the study area. Second priority was the portion of the Galloping Goose immediately to the north through Switch Bridge and up the Lochside Trail as far as Saanich Municipal Hall. This section also has some constrained locations as well as relatively high user volumes. Third priority, the section of the Lochside Regional Trail to the north, that being the section from Saanich Municipal Hall all the way up to the McKenzie Borden location. Priority 4, section of Galloping Goose to the west, and finally the fifth priority being the section of the Galloping Goose furthest west, so Tillicum Road to beyond McKenzie Avenue. And much of this section has been improved and widened more recently associated with the McKenzie interchange. Possible trail lighting was also considered through the study and given a very specific study alongside widening and separation options. The study considered the possible advantages and disadvantages of trail lighting. Some of the key advantages included increasing user comfort and safety on trails, aiding trail users in navigating the facilities and their own personal wayfinding through the facilities, Opportunities to both recognize and then avoid trail conflict to enhance safety for trail users. Improvements to personal security and safety, feeling of safety and actual physical safety when using trail facilities, especially after hours, as well as potential to deter deviant activities from occurring within trail corridors. Some of the key disadvantages though, and there are some, there's both capital costs and ongoing operating costs associated with trail lighting. There are concerns over light spillover into adjacent areas, as well as more broadly impacting dark sky objectives. There are concerns over spillover lighting and its impact on natural habitats and the environment nearby, as well as the potential for light standards, the poles themselves, to act as a physical obstacle if a trail user were to exit the trail for whatever reason. So the potential for that being a hazard as well. So with these advantages and disadvantages in mind, the study does conclude and recommend lighting for the bulk of the trail corridors within the study area. So the diagram on the right showing that, and it's basically the full extent of the project study area, with the exception of the section of the Lochside Regional Trail nearby Swan Lake, shown in purple on the map on the screen. The study recommends light emitting diode LED lighting types. They're both effective, but also energy efficient. And consideration is also given in the study to possible dimming and motion sensing technologies, so that lighting can be effective and efficient, offered at times when it is needed most, as well as so it can be adaptive, so that in different seasons or different times of day, it emits the amount of light that is necessary, but not more. So those are some of the key takeaways from the study itself, and we'll pass it back to Emma here to talk about project next steps.
Thanks, Dan, for that detailed overview of the study and the recommendations. So I'll now outline a few of the anticipated next steps of the project prior to opening up the floor for questions. So as many of you may be aware, there's an online survey available now on the CRD website until midnight, June 13th, for public to provide their feedback on the proposal. So the results from the survey will be reviewed, and the feedback will be reviewed to determine the level of support for the separated use pathway with lighting and for the priority areas. We expect that a report will be presented to the CRD board in the fall of this year that includes the summary of the public feedback and considers the next step for possibly implementing parts of the project. So if the board does deem that there's support to proceed and authorizes that, funding would need to be secured through successful grant applications, possible partnerships, and an approved budget. So that concludes our presentation portion of today's open house. I encourage you to visit the CRD website. You'll find some other supporting information on the webpage, crd.bc.ca/trails project. You'll also find our contact information there. If you have questions that weren't addressed in the session today, you can certainly follow up with us directly by visiting the website, and just to stay in touch with how the project advances. So I'll turn it back to Beatrice now for facilitating any questions you may have.
I hope you can hear me now a little bit better. I will speak a little bit louder. I saw through the chat that it started a little bit rough, and if you think you hear strange stuff, yes, it's a huge Italian accent, so sorry for that. I see there is a first question in it, so I will read it to you, and please keep on adding questions, and we will be answering them as we go forward. So the first question is, there are a lot of concerns about how you plan to widen the section of Lochside between the Switch Bridge and Quadra, especially between the Creek Bridge and Quadra, where there are either trees close to the trail or steep hillside on the other side. Emma, do you want to?
Sure, thank you for that question. Certainly that section of the Lochside Trail does pose challenges in terms of the number of constraints within that trail corridor, including several trestle bridges, including the natural areas and slopes. So certainly those factors were taken into account as part of the development of the conceptual design options. And I will reiterate that at this stage of the project, these are conceptual designs. So if the CRD was to advance towards a detailed design of how trail construction might occur, there would certainly need to be an environmental assessment conducted, most likely a geotechnical review, and it's our practice to include archaeological review as well. So that more detailed design phase would inform those physical constraints and considerations, and then the trail design would be adapted accordingly.
Thank you, Emma. So what time, and it's kind of a follow-up question, what kind of timeline would that be looking at for that?
So as I mentioned in the next step slide, right now we're collecting feedback on whether there is support for the widening and separating and lighting proposal, and in which areas of the trail, which sections. So I'd certainly encourage you to take the survey online. It does break down the study area into different components, different sections of the trail. And depending on the level of support for the widening and separating throughout the project area, the CRD board would consider whether to proceed with the whole project, part of the project, or an adapted version of the project in September. And if they do want to advance the project, then the detailed design work and the environmental geotechnical review would follow probably into the following year.
And then I would add that many of the construction will depend also up from grants and what is available yearly from the federal and provincial government, right?
Absolutely. Thanks, Bea.
Are you planning any buffer planting along the boundary of Swan Lake?
So I'll answer that more broadly in that the Regional Trails Management Plan does identify these trails not only as functioning as bike and pedestrian and recreational trails, but also recognizes the greenway character of the trails. So very much valuing the natural vegetation within the trail corridor. So CRD's regional parks as managers of the trails would certainly look to keeping the greenway character as much as possible and working with professionals to help us design a project that retains as much vegetation as possible.
We're kind of grilling Emma a little bit, and the one that follows maybe Dan can tag into.
Sure.
So have behavioral considerations been considered? For example, prioritizing bikes at high commuting time so that the overall trail width could remain the same and preserve the most green space by the nature sanctuary. A place that represents some of critical last contiguous space of rare, threatened, and endangered plants and animals in the region.
Yeah, I think generally behavioral considerations were considered through the study, and I do think I use the word generally because absolutely they were part of the thought process that went into identifying options and then how they were applied in concept to create these conceptual designs. I think details like that in terms of how space is managed, maybe in commute times versus outside of commute times, are things that were not explored necessarily in a level of detail in the study that I can provide a concrete or firm answer to this exact question. But I do think things like this, as this initiative moves forward, as design goes from, potentially, but as design goes from the very high level work that's been done so far down to a greater level of detail, that things like this will be considered throughout that process. We have received feedback along the way around sensitivities and concerns, specifically in this section of Lochside nearby Swan Lake, and I do think that further thinking is gonna be given to how to either be comfortable with the impacts or mitigate impacts through this section of trail.
Yeah, I can just add as well that part of the exercise that Dan and his team undertook was to understand who's using the trail currently. Regional parks and CRD regional planning have counters on the trails. So Urban Systems was able to get a fairly accurate understanding of the times a day people are using the trail. Certainly that all was factored into the volume estimates and therefore their overall design recommendations.
I will add too, actually, if I could, that I presented a very succinct overview of some of that trail user volume data. There is a more extensive analysis of that information that goes far beyond just what I presented today, that is available in the study document that's on the project website. And so we'll show that project website link again, and you're more than welcome to read up on that.
Yes, and when you go on the webpage, if you look on your right top, you have a series of documents you can get more information from. Part is the management plan for the trails, but there is also done studies, so take advantage to go and look at it. We get here a great comment, and we'll just go into the more succinct part so that we have more time for questions. It's great we get this type of comments. They ask, they offer these detailed comments, and they think that the survey is not really offering that opportunity. So how are we able to collect, for example, this great comment this person offered through this chat beyond the survey? What can we do, Emma?
Definitely feel free to contact us through the website. We can have a more in-depth conversation. We can take your letter submission, email submission as part of the public record, public report of the feedback and present it to the board. You can also reach out to the CRD board in the fall when this item does come for consideration at the committee and the board level.
Yes, and remember, you can always have presentation at the board level. 3 minutes, I think, you're allowed to speak. But that's also your ability to go as a delegation when this project is presented. And something that I love, especially for virtual meeting, we can download everything. So we'll be able to download all of your comments and all of these questions from Zoom and use them as part of our data collection. So take also advantage of the chat box, which is the other small icon on your toolbar, to offer more comments. We have another follow-up question that is, will we have further opportunities to have input when implementation studies are being done to look at environment, geological and archaeological studies are being done, as you mentioned, Emma?
So yes, I would expect that there would be additional open houses and opportunities for review of the detailed designs and the professional studies as they're available, similar to what was provided through the E&N trail construction. If any of you are familiar with that project, the design drawings were made available at several open houses. There were professionals available for people to approach and ask questions. So I would anticipate that there would be a similar opportunity through future phases of this project if it proceeds.
We don't have at this moment a question, but I can maybe bring up a question we heard a lot on Friday night. Our Friday night folks was really interested in lighting and how it will look around Swan Lake, because it was also an ecological concern. So maybe Dan, you can tell us a little bit more about the motion thingy and that you were talking about.
Yeah, I can speak to the motion thingy. As I touched on in the presentation, the study doesn't conclude recommending lighting specifically through that section of the Lochside nearby Swan Lake, and that is primarily, well, entirely due to some of the sort of unknown impacts and concerns relative to adjacent natural areas. I will say that an environmental assessment was not included in the study, and so that if there's a desire to still consider and pursue lighting through that section, that an environmental assessment would absolutely be critical for that, so we can get a real firm understanding of those possible impacts. I think so. With the conclusion recommendation that lighting might not be appropriate through that segment, some alternative options to enhance visibility and illumination through that section of trail were identified, including things like enhanced paint for the facility itself through that location, trail side reflectors and things that help trail users demarcate that space. The study also touched on dimming technologies. And so the idea being and actually sensing technologies. And so the dimming component would allow the lighting levels to suit the ambient lighting levels at a particular time of day or time of year. So in the depth of winter, it can obviously be quite dark for longer periods of time versus at dawn or dusk, or in the summer, not quite so much. And so the lighting levels can adapt to that. Sensing technologies as well, where lighting is only given, or full illumination is only given when the sensors detect trail users in the vicinity. And so we're not lighting unnecessarily when trail users aren't on a particular section of trail. And so there are opportunities beyond simply just lighting or not lighting to at least improve the safety, the usability, and provide a baseline level of illumination if a section of trail like the Swan Lake section was not going to be fully lit through these improvements.
Yeah, so the objective is to find a suitable balance based on all these considerations between minimizing impacts on the environment and wildlife and providing improved safety for users.
On Friday, we also heard that people were really concerned about other trail users moving into the wrong space, like despite having separation, being in the wrong place or not knowing how to use these improved facilities. Do you want to comment on it, Dan and Emma?
Sure. Do you want to start?
Sure. So generally, CRD Parks has an initiative to promote sharing the trail and appropriate trail etiquette. So that messaging and promotion of how users should behave on the trails is an ongoing effort by regional parks. And certainly there would be enhanced messaging as needed if the trail configuration were to change to help people learn how to use the new designed facility.
I think also in terms of the facilities themselves, there are things that can be done to reinforce this portion of the trail is intended to be used by people on bikes versus the portion of the trail that is intended for walking and rolling. You can do things with different surface textures. There would be signage that indicate which side is for cycling, which side is for walking and rolling. There might be, there would be pavement markings with a stencil of each user group on there. So there would actually be design, intentional design in place as well to help aid in understanding how to use the facilities well and safely.
We have another question comment a little bit out of the site specifically, but I think it's a good hint to listen to.
Okay.
One of the participants was concerned about the new redevelopment on the Lochside by Royal Oak, where the Lochside and the Lochside Elementary School are located, and they are concerned that there will be an increase in use and vehicle traffic, and we're concerning if we would be working with CRD Stanis municipality around it, but maybe this could be a good option to also talk about how we will be working with our partners through the whole project as a whole. Emma?
Sure. So yeah, it sounds like there's a section where vehicle traffic may have access to the Lochside Trail. This person's identified as a design flaw, perhaps. So CRD has reached out to municipal partners, to provincial government stakeholders. So we are speaking with the municipalities about the trail because parts of this project area are within the City of Victoria as well as the District of Saanich. So we are in discussions with trying to get their perspectives and input, as well as the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure and police departments who may have more specific advice in terms of where there may be safety concerns at intersections or access for vehicles on a trail where vehicles are prohibited. So definitely welcome any comments and examples that anyone may be able to offer.
So I will keep on, as people think more about maybe question to ask, we still have more or less 15 minutes for your interest. I will just pull out a couple of other questions we heard on Friday. Like people were also concerned if, for example, the trail width is suitable for wheelchair or mobility devices.
So I think the separation option and the dimensions that I talked about for each component of the separated trail facility, the walking and rolling space in particular those dimensions have been recommended specifically to accommodate whether it's wheelchair users side by side or traveling side by side or wheelchair users being able to pass each other in either direction. That those movements, those activities will absolutely be able to be accommodated within the facility, separated facility type that is being recommended. I think more broadly, through improvements, through enhancements that would have come alongside with this widening project would likely be some enhanced tie-ins to adjacent sidewalks or adjacent passageways, whatever those might be, and so probably benefit to accessibility from that perspective as well. But I do think just both safety and comfort on the trail itself, absolutely, through the separation as well as ensuring that sufficient space is there for comfortable travel.
And we could follow up with that one, that we heard also that people were like, why don't you put just a hard barrier in between, or why don't you instead use some painted line? Why separating?
So I think with the reconfiguration option that's been recommended, there is the potential to come in at a later date and more physically separate with barrier or bollard or enhanced pavement marking or whatever it might be. We are not recommending to do that straight from the beginning unless there's a real issue once implemented that needs to be addressed. We feel that those barriers can serve to reduce the functional width of each trail component, where a trail user might be right up adjacent a barrier on one side. That space is going to feel narrower than it would otherwise. Those barriers can also provide a bit of a hazard, especially the faster you might be traveling on the trail, the more impactful striking that barrier could be. So we're not recommending as a starting point that a barrier be put in place, but there would be the potential in future if that need were identified.
Yeah, I'll jump in too, just to say that if this project does advance towards a more detailed design stage, there is opportunity within the corridor in some locations where there aren't as many constraints to possibly add the center boulevard in some locations, to add some greenery, to add a kind of green physical barrier between the two facilities. Contrary to that, there are some hard constraint locations within the trail corridor that we won't be able to widen and separate. So there will be measures taken to funnel users into a narrower pathway for a short period of time to, for example, cross the trestle or go under an underpass. So consideration was given to kind of some adjustments to the trail at certain locations.
We have one of the key questions we had last Friday, and I didn't get to it yet, is one of our participant biggest issues is around appropriate behavior and expectation for trail uses, and people not being able to follow simple rules so that conflict and concerns arise. So if the trail user were considered and polite, follow the same etiquette, some of the design feature being presented would not be necessary. So could not some of the money being proposed to be spent here be better used on informing and educating people about how to use the trails? I think, Emma, this is a perfect question for you.
Sure, I can give it a go first, and maybe Dan can weigh in too if he has more to add. So certainly CRD Parks has been hearing over several years from our visitor use surveys through the development of the Regional Trails Management Plan that people using the regional trails have some bona fide concerns with safety, with the different types of users, the different speeds. This is in part due to the sheer volume of users and the types of people, types of travel on the trails, but it's also partly due to behavior, as this commenter is mentioning. So CRD's ongoing trail etiquette campaigns are effective to a degree, and there may be some changes or different approaches taken in that regard. CRD Regional Parks has also increased the number of officers out in our parks and trails, especially over the last year during COVID-19, to enforce proper regulations. So that is our regulatory component of the organization. So perhaps that increased level of officer enforcement will remain into the coming years. Thank you.
Yeah. So another question that we often heard is like, will the trail be closed as you do this work? So people are panicking, thinking, what happens when this gets implemented?
So certainly well thought out trail bypass will have to be put in place if we get to the point where there's trail construction occurring. So that will be signed, it will be advertised, and it will involve coordination with municipal roadways and other trails and networks.
I think also there is some precedent for that relative to works that have been done on the trail in past. We've seen it out at McKenzie when work was being done there. We've seen it more recently on the Lochside as new surfaces, new finishings were put on the Swan and Trestles. So it has been done in past, and absolutely there would be disturbance, but work would be done to manage and identify alternative routes as works are being completed.
And we do recognize that there's other active transportation construction projects going on in the Greater Victoria area, giving cyclists and pedestrians alternative routes on the cycle tracks and pathways. So hopefully we'd find the right reroute to get you where you're going.
So, other question. Is there a possibility of involving a defined local group of concerned citizens when time comes for looking at the segment between the Swan Lake Bridge to Quadra? And do you want to take this one?
Sure. So I would say that the first step right now is just for us to receive the survey results and determine the level of support for the project in each of the trail sections and present that to the board for consideration in the fall. That is really the pivot point in this project in terms of will there be further decisions to be made or further engagement with localized stakeholder groups as the project advances. So it is maybe a little too early to say whether we would need to continue further engagement, but please do send your contact information and we can be in touch and talk about options for the future.
So, and this can go also to you, Dan. Can you address what the plans might be for the Swan Lake Trestle should the plan be to widen the trail?
Yeah, it's a tough one. Obviously, widening a trail is one thing. Widening a structure would be something else altogether. The work we did here, we worked to understand what the physical dimensions were, the constraints were, I guess, for some of these pinch points, Swan Lake Trestle being one of them. And I believe that width was in the range of 3.5 meters. So obviously the trail type that's recommended was 6.5 meters. That's significantly wider than the 3.5 that's in place over the trestle now. And so I think we would, structures like that, I personally can't really comment on the likelihood or the possibility of widening a structure like that. There's obviously a scale of cost there that's quite significant. But I do think with the width that's in place there relative to some of the widths for trail widening that we're considering through the study, there would have to be real careful consideration given to whether that widening on the trestle could take place or how we transition from a wide separated facility down to something more narrow at these pinch points.
Yeah, so the Swan Trestle as well as the Brett Trestle are owned by the CRD, and their lifetime for renewal is approaching. So the board in the next number of years would be looking to do some improvements on those trestles. So that would be an appropriate time to consider whether there is a widening and separating initiative underway in that location and how best to accommodate the replacement of the big structures.
So we are leading into the end of our presentation, but I think we can still squish in a question. So Emma, is anything being considered to improve ease and safety of road crossing along the trail?
Sure, I can take that one. Great question, because that road crossings and intersections are definitely a key place where there's heightened safety concerns. So in this Victoria and Saanich area, the roadways themselves are managed and owned by the municipalities and not the CRD. However, CRD and the partner municipalities do have a good working relationship in terms of implementing a consistent type of signage and crossing measures throughout the trail corridor. So it is an initiative from the municipalities at the road crossings, but Parks does have a good working relationship in terms of making sure that what's implemented is consistent.
So I don't see any other question coming. So we'll take a moment, the opportunity to share again my screen so that you can see again our technology, our information. And please be aware that the survey will be ongoing for another week until Sunday. So spread the voice that the survey is active. Invite other people to take the survey. Follow us on the website. There will be this webinar posted, and there will be more information. Oh, let me see. Someone just squished in maybe another question. Oh no, this was the one that I just did. I didn't want to let anyone miss this out. So we are really grateful for your time with us. And as they say always in the cool places, stay tuned. There will be more information coming out. And really let everybody know that this survey is still ongoing. Connect with us with all the information you want to share and all the things we don't know, as these are critical for us to move forward. And we will definitely on the website keep all the information of next steps and how this project evolves. So thank you so much for coming here today. And I don't see any other question popping up, but if you have something really that still stays on your heart, you have a couple of minutes for it. If not, I can talk about the weather for 3 minutes in a row. I can do that for you. But jokes apart, thank you so much for attending this webinar. And please connect with us with more questions if you didn't have them right now, and use the website to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.